What's up, you guys? I'm Dan. This is Frugal Not Cheap. Today we're going to go back to the basics and talk about the financial priority list. Where should we start? If you've started taking a serious look at your finances and you're thinking, well, I've got some student loan debt or maybe some credit card debt, or I have these goals I'd like to achieve, like I want to be a homeowner someday, or this kind of thing, you might be thinking about how to decide where to prioritize. Which are the things that we should tackle first? Which are the things that we should tackle second? How do we come up with this plan? Well, that's exactly what this episode is all about. We'll look at what I'll call the financial priority list, but of course this isn't all new stuff that I came up with. It's kind of my own take on some ideas that are in other places, such as the Money Guy show's financial order of operations, or the investment order sticky on the Mr. Money Mustache forums, and I will put links to those in the description below so you can get a slightly different view on these things and also some different details that they might have. Now, along those lines, one thing to keep in mind is that your particular situation may have some nuances, some differences that might move this order a little bit. And so, of course, and also you might have different priorities, just personal priorities. You might really care about one thing much more so than another, and you might therefore choose to tackle things in a different order. So in general, the order that I'm looking at, though, is a mathematical one in terms of trying to achieve sort of the largest portfolio we can accumulate for the future, right? So that's really kind of the idea behind it. But then also it's a bit tailored to the financial independent retire early kind of crowd, where your spending is generally not going to be all that high in retirement. So you won't have these really high tax rates relative to the tax rates that you might have now. Anyway, we'll kind of deep dive into that a little bit more as we go through the different items on the list. So just to reiterate, the financial priority list might be a little bit different for you given your priorities and also your particular situation, but I think it will still be a very helpful guide nonetheless. So, what's the first thing on the list? What is our top priority? And this is something that is, I think, widespread advice. Is the first thing to do is to establish an emergency fund. So why is the emergency fund a top priority? Well, it does two things for us. The first one is it provides a buffer so that you're able to take care of sudden things that come up unexpectedly without having to go into more debt in order to take care of them. So if you think about it, if I instead pay off some credit card debt that I have, well, that's great, but then when this next emergency comes up, I'm just going to have to put that right back on the credit card, and so that's not going to be very good. So that's one reason. But the other reason is also psychological. It's not good necessarily. I did this for a while, but it was really a pain to run a very, very lean checking account because, well, so for instance, for me, I have my credit card set up to be paid automatically every month in full. And some months that number is a little bit bigger than others. And I don't want to have to worry about having exactly enough to cover whatever that credit card bill is in my checking account. And so I keep a buffer in there, say maybe 1 month or 2 months expenses. And then you never have to worry about bouncing a check or having insufficient funds fees. So that might be different depending on where you are in your financial life. You might be able to put together maybe 1 month's worth of expenses in your checking, and then the rest of your emergency fund could be somewhere else earning some interest, like say a high yield savings account, I think would be a great choice. But in general, for an emergency fund, we're looking at between 3 and 6 months of your monthly expenses. So just come up with your expenses, put that much away, and you'll have a nice buffer to take care of emergencies and also to give you peace of mind that you won't be getting any insufficient fund fees or bouncing any checks out of your checking account as well. So it's just nice to have that. One of the great things that comes out of having your finances on a really good footing in general is peace of mind. That you just don't have to worry about things that much. You don't have to worry about the next paycheck. You don't have to worry about buying in bulk when you see a great deal at the store because you know you've got the funds to cover it. So these are some really good things to look forward to or things that you might be enjoying depending on where you are in your journey. Okay, so once we've established the emergency fund, what's the next thing that we're going to look at? And you might be surprised that we're not going to do the high interest debt just yet. The reason for that is a high interest debt, even if it's credit card debt, might have an interest rate of 23, 25, 27%, which, by the way, I think is terrible, right? No question about that. But we can get an even better return somewhere else with our money, and that is with employer matching on our retirement contributions. So if you have a 401k plan or something like that at work where your employer will match 100% or even 50%, then you should absolutely take advantage of that at this stage, just up to the point where they stop giving you a match. So if it's 100% match, you're looking at 100% return on your money. It's free money. Really, I think of it as part of your salary that some people choose not to take, which I think is very silly. So definitely take that part of your salary. It's on offer. Just grab it and you'll get 100% return. And having that 100% return will make up for, even if it's not a very good 401k plan, say it's got high fees and all this stuff, well, still, 100% return on your money is huge. And so absolutely, that's the next thing to take advantage of, but just up to the match. Okay, so we've established our emergency fund and we're contributing to our retirement account up to the maximum that we'll get a match on. Now we're going to look at our high interest debt that we were thinking about a moment ago. So what is high interest rate debt? Well, that's going to depend a little bit on your temperament and how you feel about it. Some people are much more debt averse than others. But one way to think about it, and this comes from the Mr. Money Mustache forums, is 5% above the current 10-year Treasury rate. Or, I don't know, I just call it like 6%, right? That's personally the number that I would use. If the debt is at or above a 6% interest rate, then it is fairly high, and then I should take care of it. So why do I think of it that way? Well, that's because, say, the S&P 500 or a broad U.S. stock market index will generate, before inflation, around 11% or so returns historically. After inflation, something like around 7 or 8%. But those are, again, not guaranteed returns. That's an average over a long period of time. Whereas paying off your debt, you get an immediate return of the amount of the interest rate. So if I'm paying off debt at 6%, I get a 6% return. And so I should definitely take advantage of that guaranteed rate versus a possible rate in the stock market. And so that's why high interest rate is number 3 on the list. Next, we have one that's a little bit niche. Not everyone has access to one, and in fact, I unfortunately don't have access to one either. And that is what's called a health savings account, an HSA. And this is different from your flexible spending plan or what have you. This is something that is triple tax advantaged. You can't put away that much. I think it's about $4,000 a year. And when I say that much, by the way, I mean relative to what you can put away in other kinds of tax advantaged accounts. I'm not trying to say that $4,000 isn't a lot of money. But again, this is kind of niche, but there is a triple tax advantage. So you can put money in that you haven't yet paid taxes on. Then any earnings within the account are also tax-free. So any capital gains and dividends, because you can invest the money that's in your HSA in whatever you want to, depending on who the plan's from. And then any withdrawals on the way out are also tax-free. So tax-free in, tax-free growth, tax-free withdrawals. That's the triple tax advantage, and that's why the health savings account is number 4 on the financial priority list. All right, so we've got an emergency fund, and we're getting our employer match with our retirement accounts. If we've got an HSA, we're going to do that. What do we do next? Well, there I think it is either the traditional or the Roth individual retirement account, or IRA. So why is because they are individual accounts. So whereas your employer-sponsored plan, which is the next thing on this list, is something that they offer, you don't really have all that much choice over it. A lot of the times they have kind of crummy plans because they're lower cost for the employer. With an IRA, you get to choose which is the company you're going to go with. It could be Vanguard, it could be Charles Schwab, it could be Fidelity or some other, but these are some of the low-cost brokerages that I tend to suggest to people. So you get to choose which company to go with, and you also get to choose exactly what kind of things you want to invest in within that fund as well. And it also gives you a lot of flexibility over choosing how much to put into a traditional IRA versus a Roth IRA. Now, this topic, of course, could be its own video entirely, so we'll just do kind of a quick rundown of what the difference is and why you might choose one over the other. So, a traditional IRA is where you put in taxes that are pre-tax. So you get to eliminate your contributions off of your tax bill, not one for one, but they reduce your taxable income. However, even though it's going to grow tax-free while it's inside the account, when you go to take withdrawals out of the traditional IRA account in retirement, then you will have to pay taxes on those withdrawals. So that's why it really makes sense to compare what your tax rate is now, your marginal tax savings rate, by putting money into the traditional IRA versus what the tax rate you expect to pay is on those withdrawals in retirement. If you think that you're going to have a very large income in retirement that will put your marginal tax rates up quite high, or you just think the taxes are going to go up quite a lot in the future, I don't know, nobody knows, right? Then you might instead want to look at the Roth IRA. And the Roth IRA, basically the difference is that you're putting dollars after tax. So you'll pay taxes on your income this year, won't make any difference for your Roth contributions for the year. But the funds that are inside the Roth will grow tax-free, and you'll be able to take them out tax-free. So there's a huge advantage there compared to just putting money in a savings account or a or taxable brokerage account, like we'll talk about later. So these are the two, traditional IRA or Roth IRA, and again, it's going to depend on what you think is going to be the difference in your tax situation now versus when you're going to pull these funds out in the future. If you're more of the financial independence, retire early, or FIRE movement kind of person, then you'll have relatively low expenses in retirement, whereas your income could be fairly high right now, putting your tax rates quite high. So you're able to save quite a bit on these dollars by putting them into a traditional IRA now, and then taking them out in the future, and then of course they're when you have a lower tax rate in the future. So there can be a good benefit there. And of course, I should point out that it's not a binary thing. You don't have to choose just one or the other. You can always come up with any mix that you want. It could be 50-50, 60-40, whatever you want between the Roth and the traditional IRA in order to hedge your bets. I'd also add that if your income is high enough, you might not even be eligible for any tax savings on a traditional IRA, in which case the choice is basically made for you. You'll have to go with the Roth IRA. Oh, and one last little benefit to the Roth IRA, though, that you don't have with the traditional is that any contribution, so the amount of money that you put in, you can pull out of the Roth IRA at any time without penalty. You can't take out the gains, but you can take out those contributions. All right, now that you've put in whatever you can into your traditional or Roth or both IRA accounts, and the limit right now is $6,000 per person per year, then we can start going back to the employer-sponsored 401k plan or similar. And again, these are coming later because we just don't have as much control over them as we do with the traditional or Roth individual retirement accounts or IRAs. So oftentimes these can be kind of crummy. The plan that I used to have at my employer was pretty darn crummy. The fees were really bad. People were not keen on participating, and I don't blame them. I work at a small company, and as my influence in the company grew over time, I was able to help steer us towards a new plan. We were able to get actually a plan with Vanguard, which is working out great, and I think hopefully all the employees are very happy with it, and it's working better for them. Certainly, I believe that it was the right move anyway. So you can decide if it's going to work for you. In general, having the tax advantage of a 401k, either a traditional 401k, or a Roth 401k might be available to you as well. Having these tax advantages are going to beat using a taxable brokerage account, unless the fees are really, really terrible, right? I don't know, if you were paying loads and you had 2% fees or something like that, then you might perhaps consider skipping it altogether, but it really depends. If you're able to save, 15% on your contributions, then probably seems worthwhile still to do anyway. So you can kind of do that math yourself and figure out what you think about that. And of course you might be thinking, well, I can't access these funds until I'm 59 and a half, right? They're locked in. Well, that's not entirely true. And these are topics that we can cover in future videos as well, of course, and I mentioned it in previous videos as well, but there are two ways to get access to 401k type funds before the age of 59 and a half. One's called the 72T distribution, 72T as in Tom. And that's basically where you set up some rules and a schedule that you cannot really deviate from in order to withdraw these funds early. So it's not very flexible, but it is a way to do it. And the other way is the way that I'm probably going to use, which is a Roth conversion ladder, where we take funds from our 401k, which then becomes a traditional IRA later on once we end the plan. Anyway, then we convert the traditional IRA funds to Roth, and let them simmer for 5 years. And once they've simmered for 5 years, basically, then you're able to treat those just as if they were regular Roth funds, and you can withdraw those contributions at that point. So you have to set up this ladder. That's why it's called the Roth contribution ladder. Roth conversion ladder, sorry. And it does take 5 years before you can start pulling funds out, but it is a way to get access to these funds early. So again, we could do whole videos about those two topics, and we probably will in the future. But for now, just to say, don't worry too much about it being impossible to access these funds before the age of 60. It is possible to find some ways around that. And that's why, due to the tax advantages, these do come before the after-tax or regular brokerage account. And that brokerage account is next. It is number 7 on our financial priority list. And so this is just, an account where you can put in after-tax dollars. There's no tax advantages at all, right? So you just take your money, you put it in an account, invest it however you choose. You will pay capital gains and dividend tax. But because there are no tax advantages, then there are also no restrictions that are put in place like in the tax advantaged accounts. And so, I can liquidate whenever I want to. I can choose my cost basis. Is it going to be an average cost or a FIFO, first in, first out? Or is it going to be LIFO? Or is it going to be lot selection, which I do and I think you should do as well, so that you can choose exactly which lots to sell and thereby gain the optimal tax advantage anytime that you make any kind of transaction. So that's the next thing to do. And this is a great place to invest money that you're not going to need for, say, 10 years or so. It's not where you want to put money that you're going to need in 5 months, right? Because, of course, the market can fluctuate quite a bit. But this is a place where we're going to try to get some long-term growth and long-term growth. And so this is going to be for sometime in the future, say around 10 years plus. All right, so that's number 7 on the list, the taxable brokerage account. Great place to invest for when you won't need the money for 10 years or more. Provides a lot of flexibility, but on the other hand, there are no tax advantages. Although saying that, you can do something called tax loss harvesting. Actually, you can do gains harvesting as well if you want to change your cost basis. That's some more complicated stuff or in-depth stuff that we can talk about in the future. For now, we'll move on to number 8 on the list, which is the low interest debt. We tackled the high interest debt early on in this priority list at number 3. And then now that we've done all the other things that should be probably a higher priority than that, then we can look at getting rid of, the last of our debt, the low interest stuff. But even here, it's a little bit up to you whether or not you want to prioritize this over the next and final item on the list. So what is low interest rates? Again, we're talking about if the high interest is 6 and above, then it's going to be 5 and below. And definitely, the closer it is to 5, the more of a priority it is, right? So the higher the guaranteed return we can get is on paying off the debt, then the higher a priority it is. Whereas if I have stuff at like 1.5% or 2%, not so much. I mean, think about it. If you've got inflation at 2%, then the real interest rate, so after we account for inflation, is basically 0. Because every year we're paying 2% interest, but we're paying with dollars that are worth 2% less than they were at the beginning of the year. So these two things even out. So at that point, there's really not a whole lot of pressure to pay off that stuff. So really, for this really low interest rate debt, like 1 and 2%, I would probably actually prioritize our last category over that. Whereas if we have stuff that's 3, 4, and 5%, then certainly I would tackle those here in the low interest debt category just to get that off our backs. Now finally, number 9, and the final item on the list is other goals. So this would be basically pre-planned spending and other things that you might think of that are particular to your situation. But maybe you wanted to go on a vacation, or you wanted to just put a little bit of money together to get a new car, or I don't know, something like that. Things that are relatively more short-term, so that we're not putting them in the taxable investment account. We're putting them into maybe a high-yield savings account so that it's more liquid and we'll be able to engage in that planned spending in the future. And why this is last is because, well, the rest of it's really about putting together your financial plan. So we're getting rid of that high interest rate debt because it's going to be a drag on us. Then when we make our decisions of how much to contribute towards our traditional and Roth IRAs, and then to our employer-sponsored 401k, and then to our taxable brokerage account, All of those decisions should be based on, hey, I want to achieve a portfolio of this, or this is my lifestyle. This is a portfolio that I need in order to save for that, in order to fund that, sorry. And so I need to be saving this much every month, roughly. And so that's how you come up with that plan. And then we want to make sure that we have this long-term plan taken care of. And then we can look at what we have left over for these other luxuries and that kind of thing. And depending on what your priorities are, of course, you can, make your own tweaks over there. We can prioritize a little more to the short term for now because we have this thing, and then we're going to bump it back up for the long term later, or the other way around, or what have you. But I think this is a really good framework to help you think about the entire decision. By the way, do check out the playlist that I put together on personal finance basics. There is one portion on how much we need to save for retirement, which will give you a more detailed framework to try to make that decision so you can come up with those goals for your tax-advantaged and non-tax-advantaged investment accounts and that kind of thing. So that's the financial priority list. I hope it's a helpful framework for you to set up your personal financial strategy, and that it will help you meet your financial goals. If you enjoyed the video, do please hit the like button. It really helps out the channel. Also consider subscribing if you haven't. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.